First off, thank you everybody for attending. It's always great to be able to share the knowledge that we have with anyone out there. Especially on a nice specific topic like audio for video games. As Joel said, my name is Chris Latham. I am a course director at Full Sail. I'm a course director for game music composition. I've been with Full Sail for about 16 years now. My history before Full Sail and even during is recording and the creation of sound and music composition. And so I have worked on the campus side for many, many years, now work on campus and online, and have worked in the recording side of it and also the music production side of things. Got a lot of topics here to share with you guys. Beyond Full Sail, I have a game audio contracting company called Engine Audio. We have EA Sports here in Orlando, so we've worked with them a number of times. And I've worked with a number of other large game titles, whether it's on iOS platform or Android or mobile devices, or whether it's for consoles or basically I've always had a passion for video games and music and sound. And transitioned into the game side of things because I've found a lot of opportunity and projects to work on. So these are the types of things that keep me busy, along with Full Sail. Full Sail, one of the wonderful aspects is it allows me to continue working out in the industry and gaining that knowledge and bringing it back to our students. So, our topic of audio for games, or more specifically, sound design for games. So I'm going to start out by talking about what is the same and what is different in the creation of audio for games versus music for an album, or sound effects for and music for a movie or a television show. In one aspect, the creation of all of the audio or the music is very much the same. It's still instruments, or it's still microphones, and it's still the creation. It can either be done in a recording studio, or it can be done in the living room, or wherever the creation of these sounds happen, and the tools. It's still for my students in the music side of things, it's still music theory and composition. For students more on the audio side of things, it's still microphones and recorders. So whether it is for an album or a television show or a film or a game, the creation of the music is very much the same, or the creation of the audio. Then what you do with all of that audio, what you do with the music, the sounds, the dialogue, that part is when it becomes more unique to the form of games. And so talk about the interesting aspects of music and sound effects for games. And one of the biggest aspects, one of the first noticeable ones, is that it is interactive, which means that the player has control over what they hear and what they do in the game, whether they know it or not, whether they're aware of it or not, and a lot of times they probably shouldn't be aware of it. Their actions that they do in the game, the buttons that they hit on the controller or hit the mouse and the keyboard, determines what they hear, and whether it's a puzzle game or a fighting game or a racing game or a sports game or a kids game or whatever it is, the player has some control over it, which means that the folks that make all of the audio and make the music don't ultimately know the final result of what's going to happen. And different video games might have a different result in the audio. Some games are going to be very similar from one game to the next. So each person who plays maybe a puzzle game, brings out their phone, goes through a couple of levels of a game, their experience as they go from level 1 to 2 to 3 is probably pretty similar to everybody else. Other, typically bigger, more advanced games, they seem like these massive worlds where you are in control of your own character. There's recently a Spider-Man game that came out, and you get to be Spider-Man swinging all over the city, and you have complete control over what's happening. To an extent, it's still a game and it's still a world. So one of the challenges and the unique aspects of audio for games is that the player actually have some control over what happens and in what order things happen. You know what is possible because you made the game, or you're part of the team that makes the game. But so you know everything that could happen. You just don't know when anything is going to happen, when they're going to go fight that monster, or when they're going to go find the secret treasure, or you have music or sounds for fighting the monster. You have music or sound for finding the secret treasure, but you don't know when any of that's going to happen. So there's this sort of back and forth between the sounds and the actual gameplay that the player actually, whether they know it or not, is in control of. So there's the interactivity nature to it. Game audio, yes, yeah, sure, yeah. Both. It depends on whatever game it is. If I am playing like a music game, a rock band game, or a singing game, or a dancing game, then I have to hit those notes. I have to do the certain thing to hear the music correctly. So the music is often reacting to whatever you're doing. But if it's building up tension to picking a correct choice or an incorrect choice, or it's leading you, if I go down this hallway, it plays good music, and if I go down this hallway, it plays evil, scary music, then maybe it's trying to lead the player in a certain direction. So it's a little bit of both, dependent on whatever happens. So we have the interactive nature. We also have the non-linear nature. So here, what this means is the music and sound effects, everything that you hear in the game, doesn't exist all as one big long audio file that plays from the beginning to end. Sound and music in a game is made up of a whole bunch of little tiny audio files, chunks of music, or individual footstep sounds and vehicle sounds, or whatever it is, that are put together to make what you hear as a whole. Compare that against a film. When you sit in a movie theater, or when you watch a movie, watch a DVD or stream a movie, you watch a 2 hour long movie, there is a 2 hour long audio file that plays from beginning to end that is all of the dialogue, all of the music, all of the sound effects that you hear in that film. And whether you watch it in a movie theater or whether you watch it at home on your couch, it's the same movie. You might hear it a little bit differently, but you always know when the chase scene is going to start. You always know when the emotional music is going to come in. It's going to happen the exact same way every single time. But in a video game, it doesn't exist in one long file. You can bring out your phone and play for a few minutes. You can sit down in front of your TV and play for an hour or so. People get lost in these very long games. They get into online and people can play for hours and hours, and 10 to 50, 100 hours on end. Games can have, they're typically, a full game is around 20 to 40 hours worth of content. Really big games can be over 100 hours of content. And that doesn't mean that there is a 100-hour long music file or audio file that plays from beginning to end to make the music or sound that you hear in the game. It's made up of all these little chunks that one of them represents danger, and over here this represents stealth, and this represents winning or losing, or the music and the sound effects are kind of segmented into these little parts that then get arranged and rearranged in all sorts of different order to create what you hear. and it should be invisible, and it should be the player should not be aware of all of this stuff happening in the background. So those are two main differences in audio for games versus a film or a music album, where the player has some control over what they're doing, and therefore it doesn't exist in one long predetermined linear thing. It's a whole bunch of little audio files doing their thing together to create what you ultimately hear. So the creation of the music is very much the same, but what you do with all of those audio files, the music, the sound, the dialogue, that part is going to be unique to the world of games. So let's go through the way I'm kind of approach this overall is going through the process from I have nothing, I need a sound, where do I begin, where do I start, and through the steps to getting a sound into a game, and kind of, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. There would probably be different levels overall. So I would take it, maybe the question from two sides. If I was, let's say I was a game developer, I knew some programming, I was interested, I knew graphics, I knew how to make the game, I was looking to do some sounds, and I don't know anything about music and sound. There are tools out there, or libraries, or sources of sounds that you can get access to that are already created and ready to go. And you could probably get to a certain point overall, and get a lot of content. Either you find it online, or you buy it out of a store or something like that, and get the necessary materials to do footsteps and a sword fighting or whatever. But at some point, it's going to go and be too custom or too specific to where you would actually need a professional audio designer, or even somebody who's just more into audio than you are. Kind of on the other side of this, if I know audio, if I know music and sound, how much of the programming code side of things do I need to know? And same sort of answer. There's a lot of like pre-done templates and projects that you can take your own stuff and put your own sounds in there. But if it gets to a point of being too custom, and it gets like you have to dive deep into code, then you find a programmer friend, or somebody that knows that side of things. So it is a mixture of the technical and creative. So you can, depends on how specific you need to get with anything. Yeah. Here we go. I need a sound. Where do I start? I don't have any sounds. You might have an idea, right? I need the engine sound to a spaceship. And so, do I make it? How do I create this? Where do I get it? So, a couple of different ways. One professional way, and I only show this as a real source of where the sounds come from. There are companies out there that all they do is go off and create some libraries of these. They can either be realistic sounds, or they could be sci-fi sounds, or and you can buy packs of sounds that are weapons or vehicles or monsters or ambiances. And this is where a lot of games and movies, there are these large libraries of sounds that are available. The problem is they have a whole bunch of content in them, but they're pretty much cost prohibitive. There are some now with the internet around that allows for smaller companies to get involved, but there are packs of sounds out there that can be purchased for games. However, that's not necessarily. We want to create this from scratch. We want to create this with little to no resources overall. So Another source, there are certainly sound effects websites out there. A very good resource is freesound.org, which is a community-driven sound library. There is lots and lots of sounds. I always point my students to this source. Lots of sounds, but a lot of very bad sounds on there. You have to kind of wade through the good stuff and the bad stuff. They are all different shades of free. Under Creative Commons, they all have different attribution approaches to how their sounds are going to be used. So you have to always warn the students against that. I mean, often for educational, non-commercial reasons, you can use the sounds for whatever, but if they go off and want to use them other places, there might be some other considerations there. So there are just, with these two examples, a library and a website, basically you could go someplace and just pluck the spaceship sound that you need and find it somewhere and find somebody who's already created the content. So those are definitely options. The next one is creating the sound using software or acoustic instruments. If you've got a synth or a guitar or some other source of sounds, then, or if you are certainly involved in like your DAW and you've got a whole bunch of virtual instruments and you can create all sorts of stuff from basic synthesizers and build some pretty complex sounds. That is typically better for the world of sci-fi and technology because it is all synthetic. It's a little bit more difficult for things like bird tweets and a footstep and an explosion or something like that you might need for a game. So it can be created from other musical sources that you might already have. But the best way overall is going out and recording these sounds yourself. And this is something we always encourage our students to do, especially working together, is to take whatever tools that they have and go capture the sounds themselves. This can often take some time to build up. That's why having students kind of work together. Hey, we need to create 3 different types of robots. So you go off and record everything in your kitchen, and I'll go off and record everything in my garage, and we'll kind of put them all together and see what we can come up with. And I always tell the students, like, I'm not expecting you to go off and crash your car or blow something up to record like an explosion sound, but and that's why certain sources online or in these libraries, those exist. But the best way is definitely to do it on your own. And one of the best ways, the most easily accessible ways, is your phone. I can typically guess that a crowd of students are going to be equipped with a smartphone. And so whether it is, most of my examples are iOS just because I have an iPhone, but most of this stuff translates over to Android also. But Apple has its own voice recorder, which is perfectly fine. There is other examples on the screen of different apps that get a bit more professional. And while you record it on your phone, you might listen to it back on your phone. It might not sound all that amazing, but if you go and plug it into a computer and listen to it on your computer speakers or headphones, it typically is a pretty good source overall, especially with nothing else. I am definitely a proponent for the students of quantity over quality in the beginning. Like, don't just sit around waiting to spend all your money on this big expensive equipment. Use the tools that you already have and try to do the best work that you can with the tools that you already have. So the having a phone in your pocket means you have a recorder with you at all times. We have the phrase of ABR, always be recording. Just have it available and you'll find that you can get a strong library of all sorts of stuff. And then kind of stepping up in the quality and, of course, expense of all of this stuff. Beyond the phone, the next level in are handheld recorders. Popular ones out there are made by Zoom H1 and the H1N and the H6N. Just goes up in price and the overall capabilities of them. The good thing about these is they have these onboard microphones up here. So, and they're very, very portable, and they are pretty high quality overall. They're often used on certainly professional projects. Oh, yep. Oh, yeah. I know this one is what, about $300. This one's either 99 or 199. So and they then go down in quality. You can still can certainly buy like voice recorders that are even cheaper than that. So the advantage of this is that they do have two microphones on them, so that they are recording in stereo. So. Mhm. It will definitely be a better quality overall. I think the advantage of a phone is that there's just more of them, and every student has probably their own access to them. And so it would be a question of just quality. I don't think that these really are, unless you get up here and you can like hook multiple microphones and do all sorts of extra stuff with the bigger one. But uh, I don't know that there is going to be that much of a quality difference between just a phone and one of these, except for it is stereo. I think. Let me next one here. Just do the last one. And this, of course, is the extremely cost prohibitive one, but is where the professionals are at. This is where you hook up. These are like $4,000 a box, and hook up 8 microphones, but they certainly just get higher and higher up in quality. So I think that. Oh, and the other thing is that those boxes don't include microphones, and so if you needed multiple microphones, that's a whole nother investment. So it does get very cost prohibitive very quickly, but they are all basically portable recorders to move the audio around. But I would say I think just the availability of the phone. I will constantly do this where if I hear something where I'm just out at the park with my kids and I hear something cool, I'll record it and check it out and see if I might even use it as it is, or if I need to, I'll go back and record it with a better system. All right. Yeah. So, any questions so far? I'll just throw that out there as we go along. Next. No problem. Excellent. So, so at this point, you would have a recording on your phone or some audio captured somewhere. Honestly, if our students are equipped with laptops, or I mean, if it's a computer, if it's a tablet, all of them have the capability of it. So any of those pieces of technology will help out in capturing the sound. So once we have the sounds captured, okay, great. I went to my my AC handler out in the back of my house, and I recorded it for a minute, and I'm going to use that to make my spaceship sound. What do I do now? How do I take this audio and do anything with it to make it sound interesting? And so this is where we get into the digital side of things. This is where we get more into the domain of the audio creator. So these are typical tools for the creation and editing and preparation of audio. Industry standard out there is Pro Tools, equipped in all sorts of studios. Um, I would say that not necessarily the most popular tool in game audio, because of the fact that we deal with a lot of individual little files instead of like one whole song. A little bit different approach, but certainly is very capable in all of that. Both Reaper and Audacity are free to start out with. Audacity is like free, will always be free. Reaper is one of those, it's free in that it will annoy you every single time to purchase the license for it, but it will still allow you to do everything, the full program without purchasing it. And then the base version is only like $60 compared to hundreds of dollars for Pro Tools. So Reaper's a very popular tool, and actually what I'll be using to demonstrate some of the techniques that I'll talk about. So yeah. I would, yeah, I would say Audacity. One of the uh, benefits when starting out with Audacity is that it just works on single audio files instead of I mean, it can get into multi-track, which means multiple, like this, where you have multiple things playing at the same time. But for the most part, it's mainly working on one file at a time. The control over it, like once you get handy with these programs, the control over it gets a little bit clunky, but it is definitely very, very capable of, and there's being free, very available, which means there's a lot of information on the internet and how to work with it overall. You can go, yes, you can go further, and a lot of it is just faster, and do things faster and easier. Absolutely. So and of course, the choice of these and which way to do any particular function is a whole nother topic for conversation. But definitely having some tool to edit your audio is there. And actually, let me just double check here. There we go. I have Reaper loaded up here. Oh, there's my mouse. So I'll be jumping over to that here in just a sec. Okay, so we have an audio file, and we want this spaceship sound to play constantly, right? So as long as you're in the spaceship, you hear this engine sound, this sound of the spaceship engine, which means what we need is the file to loop. We need it to play endlessly. We need it to go around and around and around, and each time it gets to the end of a file, we want to make sure that it doesn't hiccup or pop or click or do anything that makes somebody realize that it's actually going around and just looping. Looping audio files are one of the most basic foundational tools, building blocks for creating audio for a game, mainly because we don't know how long anything's going to take. We don't know how long it's going to take for them to beat the bad guy, or we don't know how long it's going to take them to solve the puzzle, right? Unless there's a timer that says you have 2 minutes to figure out this puzzle or everything's going to collapse, then okay, we know it's going to take at least 2 minutes. So, but in a lot of situations in a game, you don't know how long it's going to take them to figure out the next part of, to move on to the next thing. So looping audio, looping music, and letting it just sit there and go around for however long it needs to makes a whole lot more sense for games. So here, as an example, I have a piece of audio that, let's see, loop, and take the fader down. Okay. So that should be broadcasting. You should be able to hear that. And I am going to, let's see, actually this is part of a much longer one. Get it back to what it was originally. So I've got some audio here. It's got this really weird sound in it, and I'm just going to use this to create a loop. So I could start out by chopping away at big sections of this and say, okay, this is all I want. I want to make this part loop. And I could listen to it, and if I get to the end here, it should hiccup. Right? It's a really obvious change. Just changes and starts all over again. So I want to make this loop and make sure that it stays and plays forever. And a really easy way to do that is we can split a file in half. And if you take the two halves and reverse them, and then just kind of put them on top of each other so they crossfade, then the next time they play, it will be a seamless loop. And the reason it works is because the outside edges used to be right next to each other. If I go over here and let it play, it'll be invisible as it goes around. And that way, and then all you have to do is fix this part in the middle, and it just crossfades from one to the next. And it should allow it to play forever, and somebody would never hear that it's actually looping around. Let me go back all the way here and take like a slice here and a slice here and delete these two parts. And then you just chop it in half and then bring this part over here. Now, this doesn't work for music. If it was something that was rhythmic, it would just, I would have completely destroyed the rhythm. But for these weird pads and tones, ambiances, like a spaceship engine, all of that stuff works really well for this. So that's one editing technique that is very, very constantly used. And we can do this to make audio play forever. Ambiances, it works for like pads, but nothing rhythmic overall in the music side of things. So a loop is extremely important because this can sit there and play for as long as it needs to before I move on to whatever the next sound is going to be. And if it's not looping, whoops, oh, I'm back over Reaper. If it's not looping, we typically call it a one-shot. And a one-shot is a piece of audio that plays once. Let's say a classic example is the star in Super Mario Brothers, right? The invincible star. You get that, and the music goes and speeds up. And it is, I don't know, I think it's like you get it for 30 seconds. And so there is a piece of music that is 30 seconds long, or a sound effect that's 30 seconds long, that plays exactly during that time period. So if we know how long something's going to take, or we know that in this example, this is, where's my mouse? The secret treasure, right? So you have an adventurer and he is wandering through the temple, and you know in the game that there is a secret treasure. And at some point they're supposed to, well, they may find it, they may not. And so at that point, there's a piece of music that plays all the way through while they're adventuring around. But then there is something, let's say it's called the found it stinger, where it says, hey, you found something, so good job. Here's a little sound effect. Here's a little piece of music. They're typically, as shown down here, meant for emphasis or embellishment to basically tell you you've done something good or you've done something bad. In a puzzle game, if you're playing Candy Crush or Bejeweled or something like that, and you do something good, it's typically a little sound effect or a piece of music that goes up in an upwards direction. It's in a major key and it goes dun-dun-dun. Good job, you did something. You did something positive. Or if you do something bad, then there's dissonance, or it's in a minor key, or just it sounds bad and goes in a downward direction often. So you're basically training the player good to do stuff, do correct actions and incorrect actions to reflect whatever's going on in the game. Other aspects of the design, don't just rely on one sound effect. Here I have, let me turn this down, I have an explosion sound. Not all that exciting on its own. Sorry, I don't mean to blast your ears if I am. But if let me go, I have more. Oh, I don't have my desktop. Where's my desktop? Hold on. If I go find all of the rest of my explosion sounds and drag them in there and just kind of line them all up. Now, of course, I haven't really done anything more specific here, but by default, oh goodness, this is going to be very loud. Hold on. Let me not blast everybody's ears. Let's do this, and do this, and take this down, volume down, and go here. Even then. But there's a lot more stuff going on. And that's way too loud, and I've overloaded everything, and I need to mix, and I'd probably switch the timing on some of these. But basically, that's a quick example to say, don't just rely on one effect. Record different variations of them and layer them together. And so I've got one that sounds like this. One that sounds like this. One that sounds like this. And I got all of them off of that freesound, freesound.org site, just to show a different example. That's the quick concept of just not relying on single sounds, actually developing more of a design overall. And then on the other side of, for games, randomization is a huge thing. We don't just take the same sound and play it over and over and over again, the same footstep, and just go like, here's left foot, here's right foot, and all it does is go tick-tock, 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 or gunshots in a game, or bird tweets, or dogs barking in an ambience. You don't just have the same dog bark every single time. You go out and you record 10 dog barks and play them at different times in different order and different locations around the world, and it actually sounds way more alive and interesting. So that is a very big key element of making sounds for games versus making sounds for a movie. When you make an explosion sound for a movie, you craft this one perfect explosion sound for that one part in that game or in that movie. But for a game, there's going to be lots of explosions happening at different times in different ways, so you have all of these variations, so it's not the same thing over and over and over again. Processing. I love this image because it uses rabbits to describe all sorts of wonderful audio topics. But processing is changing volume, changing the pitch, adding compression, adding reverb, adding distortion or delay, or just any sort of effects processing out there. This is when the creativity gets into play and the more of the design happens. You go and you record your sound, you bring it into the game, into your DAW, you edit it, then you start adding a whole bunch of effects on, and you make it sound way more like maybe a spaceship or an engine overall. And so that's when you get into plugins. I provided a PDF with all sorts of links to free plugins There's just tons of fun processing out there. I always encourage students to go get their hands on all sorts of different stuff, just to get access to all of these tools to get an idea of what they do. So this is where the creativity really comes in, using all of these tools and stacking them up in different ways to create effects. You start out with a basic, I don't know, you take a glass bottle and you break it and you record that sound. And then you take it into your computer and you can make it sound like a monster or something like that, all through all of these tools. And so this gets into the idea of, this is really where sound design is. And this is, again, a whole nother world of discussion. And it gets very deep and very philosophical at times. But this is when it comes down to the design aspect. I'm making a spaceship sound. So what out there can I record? How do I bring it in together? How do I create the different layers for detail? And then how do I build it in a certain way to make it work in the game? And a lot of this is experience and trial and error, tons and tons of error, and then eventually you get to something that actually sounds good. Our students sometimes are notorious for thinking that they only have to have the best thing and the best plugins and the best software, and only if I had this $1,000 thing could I actually be good at the industry that I want to be involved in. And the reality is it's just getting good with what you have access to and starting as early as possible with whatever you have and practicing with those tools, because you get good at those and it leads to other opportunities to get more and more more and more tools in your toolbox, and it just grows from there. So sound design for a game incorporates ambiences, the world, the characters, all the good guys, the bad guys, which a lot of time turns into aliens and monsters and robots and all this fun opportunity for sounds. Lots of games, there's battles happening, whether it's firearms or whether it's swords and shields and arrows, vehicles, all sorts of interest, just tons and tons of opportunity for cool sound effects. And where a movie, you create one perfect version of a sound for every single one that happens. In the game, you have to create all of these different variations for all of the possibilities that goes on. So once you get you record your audio, you bring it into the tools, you manipulate everything. Then you got a really cool sounds. You got a really cool sound ready for the game. Then you have to get it out of the DAW, and that's known as formatting and bouncing. You bounce the file out of your DAW, and one specific part for games is it has to be formatted very correct in a very specific way, or else the game is it's not going to work in the game. Even though computers, like, they're very, feels right now technologically advanced, they're doing all sorts of stuff, they really are quite dumb boxes. They really only do exactly what you tell them to do. And if you happen to just name a file wrong or put it in the wrong format, it's just not going to work. And so an aspect of this is troubleshooting and making sure things work properly. So this, typically most of our files are WAV files, if you're familiar with that. But this gets into the way nerdy stuff of sample rate and bit depth and number of channels, or if it's surround sound. So, but it's an important aspect to make sure that everything is up and working. Then there's typically a stage of testing everything out. Again, this gets a little nerdy also. It gets a little deeper into the process, but sometimes it's done in your digital audio workstation. You'll play the game and you'll capture some video, and then you'll just post it like a movie. You'll go and place all of the sound effects and show off what it's going to look like. In a more advanced sort of way, they use tools. One very popular one is known as Max MSP, and this gets into actually setting things up like they're going to work in the game, where you can hook up a controller and manipulate the sounds and hear how it's going to play back. So at this point, you have a WAV file, and you would eventually have many WAV files, and you want to actually get them into the game. And this is where a lot of audio folks encounter a roadblock, where they know how to make audio. You record your instrument. You're a guitar player, or you're a piano player, or something like that, and maybe you've had some experience with getting music set up and recording music, or making sounds. A lot of people know how to create the audio, but how do I actually get it into the game, and how do I get it set up? And that is the process of implementation. Sounds are implemented into the game, and this is typically a mixture of the creative side and the technical side, the audio people and the programmer people that make the game. So it all depends on what access you might have with different types of students. With Full Sail, we have game development students that are the programmers. They can write code all day, but couldn't write you a song to save their lives. And then all of our audio folks, they open up a piece of code and look at all that text and just melt at that point, but they can write music and create audio. So it typically, just in the professional world, it's this melding of the minds together. Very rarely do you find folks that will kind of bridge the gap between those two sides. The way I relate this is the world of the DAW. This is the world of the audio person making all of the sounds. This is the game, and we actually are familiar with this side too. We can look at this and say, hey, it's going to be a fantasy game, and this is a kingdom, and the orcs are going to invade the kingdom, and we need to make sounds for all of that. But when we make the sounds, then it's really how do we get them into the game. And some of the main tools that are the most popular out there, I leave this in a pretty kind of high-level sense overall, but there are two main tools, one known as Wise and one known as Fmod. Even with the two W's, for whatever reason, it's Wise. And this is kind of like the Ford and Chevy of audio middleware tools. Now, audio middleware. Middleware is software that's in the middle between you and the code. We don't ever want to, we're audio folks, we don't want to deal with code, or maybe you're a game design person, you want to learn a little bit more audio, and this might be more of your wheelhouse overall. But these are the tools that bridge the audio and the code together, so that the music sound designer people never have to touch code, and the programmer game people never have to touch audio. And there's middleware tools for graphics and programming and gameplay and networking, all sorts of different stuff. Of course, in my world and my students, it's the world of audio, so audio middleware. Very, very, and if I have a few minutes after this, I'll show you some examples. But audio middleware tools are the main way of getting audio into the game. And then the game itself, if you're familiar with game development, then you're certainly familiar with popular game engines like Unity and Unreal. And the way I always relate this to our music students is in the same way that we say that music and sound, I'm going to write my next album and I'm going to use Pro Tools to do that, or I'm going to use Logic or Reaper or Ableton. If I'm in those set of tools, that's the same thing. Like people say, I'm going to go make my game in Unity or the Unreal Engine. These are the main tools that people use to make games, just in the same way that we go off and make all of our sound. One of the best things in my domain of education in game audio is that all these tools are free, both Wise and Fmod and Unity 3D and the Unreal Engine are extremely popular. A lot of our students these days are very familiar with the Unreal Engine. Your students may be aware of this tiny little game called Fortnite that's out there that has made stupid amounts of money, and is quite popular with our student demographic, and but that also gets them a bit of exposure to the actual tools that are available, and all these tools are free, ready to go. So to kind of wrap everything up, try it yourself. Some steps here that would just be thrown to you to encourage either you or your students to try this out. Bring out your phone. The voice recording app is already included in the default, or at least on the iOS side. I think there's also one on the Android side, to record some audio. However you record it, you just plug it in your phone into a computer, and there are steps to get the audio off of the computer. I think you can even like email it to yourself, or I think there's some Bluetooth stuff that can go back and forth. Then take your audio and try using a DAW to edit, I forgot the slash, edit or design a sound effect. A sound effect. Didn't read that line. Okay, so take your audio in and manipulate it somehow. Shorten it up. Maybe try the looping technique, or taking a couple of your sounds and layering them together and seeing what that sounds like. I guess that would be the third one. Layer multiple sound effects together to create a new sound, and then ultimately bounce and format the file to output it correctly. That would be the sound design steps overall. That would be the process, and this really is where the main skill set that a student or a professional would be hired on as a sound designer. Most of the time, it's all about the creation of the sound and then passing it on to another team to do it, to actually set it all up. The advanced version of all of this, if you might be equipped with an understanding of some of the tools like the Unreal Engine or the Unity engine, you come at this more from a game design side of things, and you're looking to bring sounds into your game. Maybe you go find a sound on freesound.org, or you go through these steps and record your own sound, and then try using your game engine, or even trying out an audio middleware tool like Wise or Fmod to implement the sounds into your game. So give you a couple things to try out there after the fact. And I think, if I'm timing this right, that should be about the end on my end. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them up in the chat, or Joel will let you take over at this point to handle that. Yeah. What's that? Say that again. Oh yeah, the PDF. Absolutely. It gets deep. Absolutely. In the creation of it, it would, if I would if I would kind of term each one of those. Step one is recording. Step two is editing. Step three is layering and processing and the design. And that's, like I said, a whole nother world of cool. I've recorded some stuff. I got it all together. Now what do I do with it? The whole creativity idea side of things. And then the last one is bouncing it out. That is definitely from beginner to professional. That is a certain the steps of how that would be created.
Are there any, and just so you guys know, I would get to your questions too. It's pretty fascinating for me. But if you guys want, have questions up in the control panel, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone now. And if you do have a question, you can just say your name so we hear you come in, and then you can just ask away. Or feel free to continue to ask anything in the chat if that's more comfortable for you. But just so you know, feel free to unmute your mic at this point and ask. But I did want to, is there a game, Chris, that you would reference as something that sticks out for you as I don't know, great sound design? Like
Right.
the approach is good, they use it effectively, really great examples. You probably understand what I'm getting at. But
Sure.
are there references like that that you would point to and say, listen, if you want to experience this or start getting into this, check out these games because this is what they sound like?
Right. Yeah, there's a certainly a wide variety of them. It goes off to whether it's more of the realistic sort of stuff or whether it's the fantastical sort of things. I would say that I'm playing the new Red Dead Redemption 2 out there in the Old West, and so going towards the realistic kind of sound side of things is definitely a good one. Let's see, some of the probably one of the highest regarded soundtracks out there is the Battlefield series of games made by Dice. Their ability to have you feel like you're surrounded with all of this chaos going on and being able to localize where things are and how close or far away they are is always impressive. You could go back to almost any Star Wars game because of it being a Star Wars and having such amazing classic sounds in it, being in that world. The whole Bethesda Skyrim series or Elder Scroll series is another very well respected one. The it's I have an honest challenge in my class is a difficulty finding a new game that has bad audio in it. And I always love finding those examples out there. But most of them are covering the bases pretty well, and only until it's like you get to like a new higher end kind of stuff that is where things are really new and different. I don't know if anybody's had any opportunity to try out any VR stuff, virtual reality. It is from an audio nerd point of view, it is one of the coolest experiences out there. The problem is they're making a lot of people queasy, getting people sick over it. But other than that, as an experience, it is pretty amazing from the audio point of view, and for everything else. So
Different approach?
it is completely different. Well, let's say this. No, this like what I have on the slide is exactly the same. Like the process of creating it is the same, but the main difference, the way I always explain it, is every other media that you've ever experienced, watching a TV show, watching a film, playing a video game, reading a book, whatever, you're sitting on a couch and the music and sound and everything is for you as the audience. So let's say you're watching Star Wars. Darth Vader enters the room. You hear the Imperial March behind him. And that's for you in the audience. So it lets you know that Darth Vader's showing up and bad things are about to happen. So you get into, you play a Star Wars VR game, and now all of a sudden you are Darth Vader. Does Darth Vader hear the Imperial March everywhere he goes? Like whenever he enters a room, if I was Darth Vader, yeah, I want to hear the Imperial March everywhere I go. It's awesome. But but does he actually hear it? And now you aren't just the person sitting on the couch watching the movie. You are the character in that world, and it very much changes what people are accustomed to. And it's very much the Wild West. Nobody's really got it figured out, and it leaves a lot of opportunity for any of that stuff. So that gets even more on the new advancement kind of side of things. That's why I geek out about all that stuff. But
Yeah, are you guys doing that in your class? Are you going into that?
I discuss it as a concept. I encourage the students to visit the VR lab that we have on campus to see if they can get an opportunity to check it out. We do have a whole VR program, and our students can work on their projects and get involved. It is a very interesting approach to it all. But yeah, I discuss it from this point of view, and I always ask the students if they've ever experienced, and it's typically at least one of them in the classroom has a buddy or tried it on in a store or something like that just to experience it. And yeah, we just kind of discuss what's new and different about those approaches overall. So, yeah, I think that I like the how it all works in the background. Like it can be the most amazing John Williams score, but how is it actually working in the background that really gets me interested. And so there's just a lot. That's another aspect of the industry that I've enjoyed is the games industry kind of looks to the film industry as a big brother, and the music industry, and the film and the music industry has been around easily over 100 years, but the games industry, people, yeah, were throwing quarters into Pac-Man in the 80s, and we got home consoles in the 90s, and I consider the modern gaming era kind of occurs in past the millennia, but we're still, I mean, that's what I always have to do the math, like 40 years, something like that. It never feels like that. We're still very, very new. I mean, so if the film industry, it's like we're in the 20s or 30s in the film industry, and the technology and where it has to go. So, and plus, technology is so driven by games, and games are driven by technology and all that stuff. It has a huge amount of room for improvement. So I always encourage my students. My class specifically is the second to last class in the program, and so I already get students that know audio and know music, and I'm just exposing them to this side of the industry and saying, look at all of this opportunity, look at all of this new changes. It allows for a younger student to have a lot of opportunity. I mean, if you have gray hair in the games industry, you are an elder, because I mean the games industry hasn't been around long enough to have that first generation of elders in it, and so it's still very, very young, and which allows for a lot of opportunity for young individuals getting into the industry. So and I hopefully give them the idea that their music and their sound is just as viable in a video game as it is on a music album or a television show or a commercial or a film or wherever it is. So trying to give them a sense of what's possible and the fact that it's always expanding. Like always relate it, like I said, oh, in the 80s are like, hey, we invented these crazy big machines that make a whole bunch of noise, and they sit in your movie theater or your mall, and they're called an arcade, and you can throw quarters in them. Isn't that great? And kids are like, yeah, that's awesome. And then I said, oh, hey, we took all those big machines and we squashed it down in this little box, and instead of giving us one quarter at a time, give us like $200 or $300, and you can buy yourself a Nintendo, and you can go home and play, and then we could just sell them $50 or $60 games over and over again. And then the home gaming industry was kind of born. Then they said, oh, by the way, we invented the internet. So now all these boxes can talk to each other and you can play online games with all your friends. Hey, cool. Oh, we took all that stuff and we shrunk it down into the size of your phone. And now it's a mobile device. And we put a store in it called the App Store. And you can just buy games for $1 a pop and have all this stuff very easily accessible. And it just changes to a new part of the industry. And then they said, "Oh, we invented VR, and now you're like in the game, and it's totally different." So every couple of years, they just keep pushing technology forward, and can only expect that that's going to keep going for quite a while. So it does provide a lot of new changes and a lot of opportunity, especially, I mean, even for high school students who are 4 years in high school and however long through college, and then getting into the industry. I mean, it's going to change. It's going to be all sorts of new technologies that they're going to be the newest and latest individuals that are trained on. So that's always a benefit for the students going through.
Well, thanks. And so we just want to check in one more time. We're not going to keep everybody on unless you have questions at this point. Use the chat. Was there anything anybody had a question about? Wanted to double check on the resources. We'll send those out, but again, unmute or just use the chat if you had a question or anything at all before we go. Do we have any openings at Engine Audio?
Do I have any openings at Engine Audio? If you would like to sit in my home studio and watch me edit files and then help you out, now unfortunately our projects are we do contract other individuals overall, but not at this time. But thank you for asking. But great. Well, yeah, well, that would say that what I do encourage for students is just start in on all of it. All of these tools are free, and you can get games to access, and you can get started on projects. And the most important thing, the most common question I get in my class is, how do I start working on games? And I say, well, step one is get a game and work on it. And that doesn't mean that you go off and find professional people willing to pay you money to do all of that stuff. You start out by taking a game that you already own that's sitting on your shelf, and on the PC side of things, on the actual like computer side, whether it's Mac or Windows, you can get access to a lot of tools that are you can take your game that you have already sitting on your shelf and maybe get access to the tools to modify and change some of that stuff. So definitely encourage people getting started from early on as they can to get started into the process.
So it seems like, yeah, just you gotta get in and get started. Just that seems like maybe the hardest part sometimes is just to get in there and start trying things.
Right. And like I said, it is the only, it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of things just not working for a while until you get things figured out. And, but getting your hands in there and just doing the most basic things and building it up from there is the best way of working on any of this stuff.